Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Hopefully you're doing well, and I'm excited for you to enjoy this section of our Linux course. So in this video, let's talk about, first of all, how do we even know where we need to navigate? We're going to take a jump back into history. Then we're also going to actually jump into the server and actually take a look at some of the commands, such as, first of all, where am I? How do I see the directories that are there, including hidden files, and how do I read it? And there's a bunch of other fun part of that. And then let's look at how do I change into another directory? And then we'll go ahead and go into how do I make a directory? How do I delete a directory? These are some basic commands that every Linux admin should know. So if this sounds like fun, join me and we'll get this party started.
Oh, it's black burning tech, we're leveling up. From networking paths to systems we trust. Let's break it down, let's build it back. Together we're learning, right on track.
All right, welcome back, everybody. As we mentioned in the intro that, well, how did this even start? Well, Linux kind of started because it's based off of Unix and other BSD-like systems from Berkeley. But how do we know what the standards are, or is there any standards for the directory structures? Well, back then, kind of not. It was just, it came out and everybody kind of did their own thing. If you wanted compatibility, like say if I wrote a program and I wanted you to run it, we would need some sort of standard for this to work. So in the time they made this standard, and it was more optional, and now to this day, the major distributions do follow the standard to a close enough, but sometimes they kind of deviate from it. So let me go ahead and share my screen and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so from here is the official file system hierarchy standard. Easier said than that, but this is actually officially from the Linux Foundation, and you can pull this up. I'll drop the link in the show notes in the description as well. So this is how we can take a look and go, what is in this /opt folder, for example? What is in there? And we can come through and it details out what each directory is for and why it exists. Most of the major distributions follow it, but there is some weird changes that some of them do. For example, you'll see where some of them will go ahead and follow it, but they do what is known as a symlink. So yes, it looks like you're actually in user/sbin, for example, but realistically, are you there? There's things called symlinks that make it look like it is when it's not actually in that same spot. So it follows the standard because you have that structure there. So if you write a program, it will see that and be able to still put stuff there, but where it actually puts it can vary. Let's jump back over on the screen and take a look. I could bore you through with walking through this, and most of these are, well, kind of optional, and then, like I said, it'll even go into the purpose of why was this even created and how do you break it down. I'm not going to bore you with the enjoyment of scrolling through and reading it to you. So let's go ahead and jump into the lab. Okay, so I built out this box for this course itself. And let's go ahead and take a quick look at this. For those who know me, I already normally have my font big, but I increased it so that way it makes it even easier for you. So let's break it down. So when you first log onto a Linux box, normally you just get greeted with this type of a prompt, whether you're at the console of the server or remoted in like we are. And we'll talk about setting this up later on how you can remote into a different servers. So from here, if we take a look, I am logged on as the admin is the name of the user we created when we set this up. And then @ is which computer am I at? I am at dev-test. Now we have this colon, tilde looking thing, and a $sign. So what this tells us is which directory we're currently in. So currently we're in tilde, which is a abbreviation of our home directory. If I don't know where exactly that is, one of the most common commands that you'll see people type is the pwd command, which stands for print working directory, pwd. So if I hit this, I can see that I'm in /home/admin, which is my home directory. This command right here will tell you where you are. And you might ask yourself, well, wouldn't I already know where I am? Well, it depends on how far deep you get in, or if you're remoted into one server, then you go to another server, and there's so many times you can get lost in where you're actually at. And later on in the course, we'll definitely see that throughout this, how this is so easy to get a little bit lost. So from here, fantastic. I can tell where I'm at, but what's here? So in Windows, you might know the dir command, which is the directory command. In Linux, we have the ls command. So if I type ls and hit enter, it gives me nothing. Because in my home directory, I don't have any files. There's what is known as arguments we can put with it. So for example, if I do ls-a, that will show me even the hidden stuff that's on here. So I can see there's a .ssh. I can see a .profile. I can see anything that begins with a dot. I know it's hidden. So I won't see it unless I put that. But there's other arguments we can do. The most common that you'll see most people do is ls-l. And that tells us we have 0. So let me go into a directory that has something. And we'll go ahead and expand a little more on this. To change our directories, we will use the cd command. And then where do you want to go? For example, we know that /home is a thing. So maybe I want to go there, or maybe I want to go to the root of the file system. So I could just hit / and hit enter. And now if I do that ls command again, as you can see, we have quite a bit of options here now. So we just showed the ls overall, but maybe I want to see this, maybe I want to see some more information about this. So I can do ls-l, which will give it to me in a long format. And let me scroll up a little bit because, like I said, my font is a little bit adjusted for this video. Now, there's this bunch of stuff here and root and whatever all this is. We'll get into that later on in the course, but essentially what this is our file permissions and what user owns it, what group owns it, and some of the information here, such as the size and when it was created. And where we talked about where you can have different things pointing to different things, like those symlinks. This is a prime example. This bin is actually in user/bin, for example. Now, this is great if I'm looking at this, but this size right here is not really human readable. This is in bytes, but typically I'm not paying attention to it in bytes, right? Because our systems are so big now, we don't really care. With that being said, we have another argument you can do is -h, which in my opinion is human readable. So I hit H, and now I can look at it. Okay, that's 4,000 bytes. So I know that's 4K. Okay, so I can actually look at the size of the files in this directory. So this is really helpful when you're looking at this. One of the biggest ways you can always get help, though, is there's two main ways. Let me share my screen real quick. Okay, so there's two main ways we can get help. Most people think just type help and it'll give us help. /? I've seen, but that depends on the developer whether they put in that as a valid thing. Sometimes you'll see -- help, but there's also one of the big ones that if it's a really good program, such as anything that's built in on the system or even programs that's designed by everything else, there's what is known as a manual page, which is literally just that. It is a manual. So let's jump back over in the lab and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, so back over here in the lab, maybe I want to know, I knew that ls command, but how did I know what this -lah and all this is? Well, let me go ahead and clear the screen. So I could do ls ? And no command. Okay, so ls-8 help. And it gives you a little bit of help right here. And it tells you what syntax and what commands we can use with this to sort, for example, like the -r if we want to be recursive. And like I said, this will give us quite a bit of information. So like that A shows us all. Do not ignore any. That was the one to view the hidden. But also note, in Linux, things are case sensitive. Most people can forget that because it's so easy. Sometimes you'll see where this has a -a and a --. That's how you know these two are, you can use either of these commands. So if you want --all, that works. Or you can just hit -a. Depends on which way, for me personally, it depends on what I'm doing. And if I want it to be more readable later. Like if I write a script, I like the -- and it clearly defining what I'm doing. Same as like a capital B. Like if I wanted to ignore backups, for example. Now, this looks fine and all, but maybe I want more information on this. And that's where we get into our manual page. And now, like I said, you can do man ls, because we know that ls command exists. And this right here will tell us what it is. It'll even tell us our syntax, so ls and our option, and then whatever our file is. This is one of the easiest things to mess up in Linux, in my opinion, is our syntax, because do I enter this here or do I enter this at the end? It's so easy to do, but from here, we can just click the up and down arrows and kind of go through and read it. So -A, for example, like I said, and this gives us a lot more detailed information on what commands we can enter. And it doesn't have to just be on this command, but a lot of applications come with a manual page. For example, maybe if we do man pwd. So this right here shows us the printed name of the current working directory. And we see, but even pwd has some arguments we could put with it. So such as the L if I wanted to see the logical or if I wanted to see the physical. There is quite a bit we can do with this, and sometimes it will go into more details, and it'll even show you who wrote it and have some copyrights and other commands that will get you similar information. That right there can come in handy if you're going, well, I know this command kind of does what I want. Maybe there's a C also that'll give you more information about something else. So as we talked about, that is the manual page, and you can just exit out of there. Now that we know we're in the home directory, maybe we want to move around a little bit. Let's say I want to get back to my home directories. CD, I can do ls and see all this here. Okay, which folder can I go into? Okay, so I see the home, CD, home, for example. And then I can hit ls again and see there's my admin account. But maybe I want to make it a little bit faster. So you'll also see some of these cd ... command, ls. And then that tells you that it took me back a previous directory. Or you'll also see a cd ... which if I do that again, notice on how my prompt doesn't change. This little part right here says /home. So I was in /home. But here, I'm just in /, so it sent me back one. And maybe I wanted to get into something really crazy like /etc/ let's just go to etc, for example. And maybe I'm here, but I want to get back to my home directory. I can always do cd space in the tilde and hit enter, and it will always take me back to my home directory. This is one of the little shortcut ones that come in handy. So if you're in a directory and you're copying something over, or you need to do that, and we'll get into some of those commands here in a minute as well. That is one of the basics of moving around the file system. From here, I'm back in my home directory. So if I do pwd, I'm in my home directory. Maybe I want to create a folder, like where you typically see maybe my desktops or my downloads or whatever, or maybe I have my important stuff. So from here, if I want to create a folder, mkdir, and then I type the name of my folder. Stuff, for example. And then I can also go ahead and use my ls command, and I can see my directory that I just created called stuff. And I can put stuff in there. I can remove it out of there. Maybe I want to remove my directory. I can do rm stuff. Stuff is a directory, so it won't let me just do that with a rm command, because rm is more for files, unless you specify some other different flags. rmdir stuff, it's gone. So if I hit ls again, my stuff folder has been deleted. So in short, that's some of the quick moving around commands you can enter in, such as cd, cd ... cd tilde. Maybe I want to know my present working directory so I know where I'm at. I can use the pwd command, as well as how do I create a directory? How do I remove a directory? That right there is a good fundamental skill that you will need as a Linux user. That being said, maybe we want to know more about those directories. Like I said in the beginning, where it was created, but it wasn't really clear. So let's go ahead and jump back in over on the server, and we're going to look at the home directory, and let's go through and try and figure out what some of these are for. So in case you're going, okay, well, where's my configuration files, for example? Where's my binaries at? Where's this at? Let's jump back over in the lab, take a look at that. Okay, so we're back over in the lab, and some of this stuff was added in later, but there is a lot that you will typically see in most Linux environments. So bin is your binaries file folder, and where we've seen that there's an sbin that is for your system binaries. Sometimes they are combined, like I believe on this system. /boot is where all your boot files would be. So the way when you're trying to boot, that's where it's going to look. /dev is your device folder. We'll talk more about this, but Linux sees every connected device as a file object. That's where that will be. But just note that when you plug something in, it will probably show up in there. /etc is where most of your configuration files are going to be stored for most of your applications and your services. You can have them in different locations, but most of the time, for most common applications, that's where that is. /home, as we discovered, is where our home directories are. Media is if we have media drivers, you can typically have them mount right there. And right below that is MNT, which is mount. So if we plug in like a flash drive in Ubuntu, it will mount our flash drive there, or we can mount other drives there for the system and other users. This is a really common area when you have a remote connection, maybe a file share, and you want it to share across your system. Proc is a special type of folder, and we'll go into more about it later, but this is where I was telling you about more of your, it's a virtual file system. /var is various files. So typically, one of the most common areas you will go in that area for is anything that could be not important. Essentially, what it used to be is in the time when we had to be really conservative with our hard drive space, that's where you would have like your logs. So like var/log, for example. So if you lost it, your system's still going to run, but yeah, you might be a little bit angry, but not that big of a deal. /system is for system files, and /user is for user resources. With that being said, this is just a high-level overview. If you want to know more in detail, please take a look at those links. And like I said, it can change varying on the different type of Linux systems you're on. But most of the time, whenever you log on to a Linux box, you will see these same directories. So I did not go into full details. Definitely, like if you're studying for like your Linux Plus or one of those certifications, they're going to ask for a few more. But this is a good little high-level overview of where most of your services and configurations and directories are. So when you look at it, you don't get intimidated just by looking at it and going, okay, I don't know what these files and folders are for. So I hope this has been informative, and I appreciate you for viewing. If you wouldn't mind, if you liked this content, please give me a thumbs up and consider leaving a comment. If you didn't, thumbs down would be okay too, and consider leaving a comment on how we can improve our content. Like I said, I appreciate your time of watching, and as always, thank you.